these things are intentional when Myles does it now, right? No sleeves anymore, right? It used to be modest, like you couldn't see how strong he was. Now he's like, oh, when I put out that picture of me with no sleeves, he noticed the reaction was, goodness gracious, that's a human being, right? And I think he's starting to realize it more and more. And you could tell just by the confidence that he has now versus what he had before his suspension, right? And it's like now you can see Myles Garrett. He's weaponizing, like Mike Tyson in his prime, that fear that people are going to have because now he's not just a young guy anymore. He's Myles Garrett. So, I was watching Myles Garrett do his press conference, right?
Right.
And I had noticed this man had no shirt on. Now, the last time Myles Garrett did a press conference with no shirt, do you remember how many sacks he had?
I didn't he have like 5 or something against the Bears? 4.5 or something like that?
Four and a half. I feel like Myles Garrett is trying to and that was in the home opener. By the way, I heard people talk about like the Browns haven't won the home opener. They've won the home opener like 2 years in a row, I think. If you go back to it, I think maybe even 3. Well, no, they definitely didn't win the home opener in 2019. But they did win. Yeah, because they lost to Kansas City week 1 last year, but they beat like the Bears or somebody or the Texans at home the next week. And then
it was the Bears.
Yeah, and then in 2020 we lost to the Ravens week 1, and then I think they won against the Bengals the next week on Thursday Night Football.
Thursday night, yep.
Yeah.
Yep, I think it was Thursday night.
Yeah, like this is like the stigma about the Browns not winning the home opener. I'm like, this is a false They won the home opener like in 2014. Like they've won the home opener before. Like that's not
I think they're just trying to switch it. They're trying to kick the can down the road and kind of be like, okay.
It's like we be looking for these things to we're knocking off the list. It's like, dog, the first game of the year not winning that was the last thing on the list. Well, yeah. I mean, the real last thing on the list is Super Bowl. Right. But everybody got that problem, right? Like that's not just the Browns. That's not unique to the Browns. It's not something like normal teams do. But nonetheless, Myles Garrett comes out there. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this is the week he decides I'm going to go shirtless, just like I did before I had 4.5 sacks. Also, he had to call out a teammate. Unfortunately, there's something going on with Perrion. I don't want to speculate on that. I'll let that situation handle itself. But
I didn't hear that.
Yeah. Perrion, I think he was not at practice for disciplinary reasons. So something's going on there.
Okay.
But it's like the last time Myles did that. It's like Myles does that, and it's like, it's like the bat light. You know what I mean? Like it's like Batman putting the light out in Gotham. It's
like Batman putting his own light. Usually, like Alfred or somebody has to put the bat signal up for Batman to swoop. So, like the equivalent is like Myles Garrett being like, I feel like there's something gonna go down this weekend. Let me throw the bat signal. He run in the back and take his shirt off and do the press conference.
Well, I think we don't even talk about it as much because we always go, good offensive tackle, great edge rusher, he should win. We don't talk about like the matchup and the styles that make that fight that might make it easier or more difficult for Myles Garrett. But you as a former defensive lineman, do you get in these situations where you watching a film and halfway through the week of breaking down film on the guy that you're probably going to be matched up against the whole game, you go, oh, I got this. Like what gives you that tell, or what if you're Myles? What do you think when he sees on tape? What do you think gives him that tell of, oh, I can have a big game?
Balance. And I think that's the biggest one for Myles Garrett, because Myles Garrett has the best bend that I've ever seen. And this is just not hyperbole. He has the best bend when he's running the hoops. And running the hoops just means that when I'm trying to turn a corner and get home towards a quarterback, usually when you pass rushing, you at least got to threaten the offensive tackle vertically first. And you have to threaten him vertically because you want to get your hips even with his hips. If you let a guy get his hips even with yours as an offensive tackle, now you have to reach and bend instead of kick sliding and just going through your natural pass pro. So Myles Garrett does two things that are extremely difficult. First, he gets even. His hips are even with the tackle, right almost a step and a half after the get off. Usually, time people is doing the get off, and they really putting a false step forward and putting one up underneath them, so they're not really gaining ground. Myles Garrett is already hip to hip with the tackle. Then on top of that, the tackles now are bending at his waist. Now, when you're dealing with guys at 6'5", 6'6", Myles Garrett is 6'4", 6'5" himself. But the difference is Myles Garrett is able to get small, skinny, and be able to duck and come underneath the arms of a tackle, especially if you're reaching and bending at the waist instead of the knees. And for me, I always looked at, if you are a waist bender instead of a knee bender, I always thought I had you. Also, you always can tell a tackle that is really dope. If you go watch and look Joe Thomas never looks like he's pressed. It looked like he drinking he's sipping lemonade and iced tea, and he just getting to his pass pro. Like he keeping it square. Like he's ready to punch with that outside arm, but he's just doing it real smooth. He's not panicked because he knows that I got the footwork. I got the footwork to recover. And so, Myles Garrett, against a lot of these tackles, it's rough for him because he can do the get off as well as the bend, and then he has counter moves to throw on top of that. So it's just a difficult matchup, man.
Yeah, and it's like, I wonder if this is more emblematic of him seeing like who he's going up against and going, oh, I got him one-on-one if I ever get it, or if he's seeing the matchup and the protection tendencies, right? Like, I think that's another thing that people see, that people like don't think about, that these DNs are thinking about. Hey, what are their protection tendencies? How do they like to chip? Do they give me like a strong, one of those like off the line of scrimmage, then they run their route, or is their chip just a little touch, right? Because tight ends, we try to get away with the little I pushed him,
I got him. I gave him a chicken wing.
Yeah, like that's how not Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce actually do this, where they're so afraid to have them lose steps on their route that they're just like, just touch them, right? We'll chip them like that, right? And you'll see that with better running backs. And I wonder, like, if you're Myles Garrett, the shift's coming. The double team's coming. That they're not going to let you be on the island. We'll break it down from a game plan standpoint, and then we'll talk about it after that. Before that, we'll start with this. From a protection standpoint, for a player like Myles, knowing the double team's coming, what do you think when he sees on film, he goes, oh, this is the double team that I got this. Like, if they try to double team me like this, that's not going to work against me. Because, again, double teams don't work by default, right? I think people think they just work by default. But what do you think for Myles, the type of schematic like double teams when he sees, he goes, oh, they're not going to do this? I'm good.
I think I was always traditionally taught. So my defensive line coach was Coach Washington, man, Eric Washington. He was eventually he went to Northwestern. After Northwestern, and eventually became the defensive coordinator. D-line coach in Chicago, then eventually became the defensive coordinator in Carolina. So he used to always teach this. When you getting double teamed as a defensive lineman, don't look at it as a double team in a sense of you trying to fight two people. You're trying to devote energy to both people. No, you defeat the first blocker, and your first blocker is the tackle. If you take care of what you need to do in the tackle, there's really nothing the chip is going to do to you, right? Like you're using your energy level, and you're not even giving them a clean surface in order to kind of block you. But most people do a terrible job on double teams is because they automatically want to start putting two hands out like this is a Dragon Ball Z. No. You're going to get T-rolled doing that. I always thought, and I think Myles Garrett is looking at it from this standpoint. If I get off and I change the line of scrimmage, my momentum automatically negates the guy that's trying to give me something on the outside. My force is going forward. It's just physics. Your force is so tough that he's not going to be able to get a good shot on you. And so for Myles Garrett, he also, and I think that's what he says when he takes his shirt off, right? I think he's to the point now, Q, that he's just on some intimidation type stuff now.
That's why. Yeah. You mentioned that, right? Yeah, I was watching him, and these things are intentional when Myles does it now, right? No sleeves anymore, right? It used to be modest, like you couldn't see how strong he was. Now he's like, oh, when I put out that picture of me with no sleeves, he noticed the reaction was, goodness gracious, that's a human being, right? And I think he's starting to realize it more and more. And you could tell just by the confidence that he has now versus what he had before his suspension, right? And it's like now you can see Myles Garrett. He's weaponizing, like Mike Tyson in his prime, that fear that people are going to have, because now he's not just a young guy anymore. He's Myles Garrett. There are tackles in this game that were like, ooh, that's a bad man. You know, they're going to be like Aiden Hutchinson was talking about. Like, there are guys coming into the NFL now that look at, like, remember when Odell came here, there were all the players that were like, oh, man, Odell's here. I used to grow up watching Odell. You know, it's getting to that point with Myles Garrett. And what I think Myles is realizing is that once you get to that point, you get that Debo effect, right? Especially, like, it's one thing when you Von Miller and you quick. Like, people don't really, like, aren't intimidated or fear that. They know that you're cold. But when you big Myles Garrett, that's something that you can weaponize, where it's like, oh, you're afraid. You might quick step me, you know what I mean? Quick step me and let me just blow by you, you know? And I think that's been the evolution of his game. And that's why I think he's going to have the best year of his career this year, because you can see him out there. He's like, I think for the first time in his career, he realizes I'm Myles Garrett. I have all these superpowers, and I am using them. The mental powers, like the psychological stuff, where he just like kind of just looks around, right? It's the Jim Brown. Remember Jim Brown used to do the push-ups, right? You know, Ray Lewis was big on this, right? Ed Reed were big on that body language, and
Sean Taylor with that iridescent shield. Like, he looked like Shredder out there. Like, he was like, you get to a point. I'm glad you brought up Mike Tyson. To this day, the lore of Mike Tyson is still there. It's almost generation to generation. Like, there's people like Bo Jackson. There's people that come into the purview of the public, and they automatically know what it is. I love to hear them tell that story about even when Tecmo Bowl came out. The Japanese creators of Tecmo Bowl, they didn't have ratings. They didn't have, you know, different skill sets that, you know, was programmed in each of these guys. But let me tell you something. They knew 34 was special. They was like, okay, this guy has a little bit different. Man, Bo Jackson was tremendous. He had one play, but you couldn't even stop it. They picked the play and Bo Jackson to break. I think Myles Garrett this year, to me, I said he has an outside shot at breaking the sack record. And I said that based on the first 4 games and based on the way I see him carrying himself at this point. And because sacks are something that you really can't. If you get a sack, you work hard for it. Now it's to the point where he expects to get these sacks. I think he literally thinks I should get 3 a game.
Well, this is what made what he did on Sunday so impressive. He was dominating that game without even getting it. I'm pretty sure if Gbqc becomes a really good player, right, he's going to tell us that was his welcome to the NFL moment. Because, you know, when you hear these stories from like basketball players, when they go up against MJ, or like, you know, whenever you go up against greatness, they always tell you, see, I knew he could get a lot of sacks, but it was like he was toying with me, right? He was like, let me show you how many ways I can dominate the game without even getting a sack. And that's what he did for like the first 3 quarters of the game. He's like, I don't even need to get a sack, and I'm going to dominate this game and just teach you, young blood. You know, because we done had that, right? Oh, you can't shoot jumpers. You can't beat me at 101. And then that old man shows you how to, you know, it's that same stuff that Myles was doing. He was like, let me show you how I can dominate this game. And then he just decided, he was like, now I'm going to get 2 sacks on your ass real quick, right? Got a sack and a strip sack back to back. Like and it didn't feel like he got the opportunity. It felt like he just decided to.
Yeah,
right?
He just took that. I decided I wanted to do this right now. Won't.
Like he got those 2 sacks with the same ease that I go to my refrigerator and grab something to drink. Like it was it was that simple for him. He was like in that much control of the game. And like that's where greatness separates from really good players, right? Is that level of intimidation. Tom Brady, he's very serious about that body language and setting that up, because when he gets the ball, I don't care how old he is. That's Tom Brady, right? You know,
especially in the fourth quarter. Let you have any time on that clock. I don't care what it is. 3 seconds, you think he can go down and do it.
Yeah, the great players in this league, you feel them, right? Like that's what keeps them great, is that they have this aura about them. Whether it's intimidation or supreme confidence, it's that aura that sets them apart. And that's what Myles Garrett has seemed to develop and is starting to master, which is, oh, you're afraid of me, right? This young dude, he grew up watching me, right? Like he was a freshman in his dorm room when I was in the NFL my first year. You know, he is now, when you get to a point to where you're so good that you start to get a mythology about you, right? As a football player, it's about how you can weaponize that. And you see a dude, and he's into that. He's into poetry. He's into reading. He's greatly aware of the mythology that's being created about him, right?
The tombstones in his front yard of the quarterbacks he sat
and he assists in the building of that mythology. And he doesn't do this for show or for vanity as much as I think he does it to weaponize that fear that people have about him. Why did Ray Lewis do that dance for 20 years? It wasn't because he felt like he needed to do it. It's because, imagine, 2007, you a young buck out there holding your pads, ready to play running back for the first time, and then 52 comes out there doing the Ray Lewis stuff, and now you're like, oh, I'm in the NFL, and I'm about to have to go up against Ray Lewis. He can hit me today. You know what I mean?
And you know what, Quincy, this reminds me of something. I'm a big fan of history. And so this reminds me almost like the pomp and circumstance of how, war techniques and tactics people used to take. So it's kind of like the Romans back in the day. Hannibal crossed the Alps with elephants. And so you got to think about, they talked about when they were on the battlefield, how the war elephants just stoked fear in all the Romans. Like, you got guys that they weren't that practical, right? They weren't like, hey, this is a new version of a tank. We're going to destroy a whole army with just the elephants. No, it was psychological, because you see guys on the front lines seeing they boys, seeing their comrades get crushed to death by an elephant. And they're like, I have never seen the audacity of you bringing elephants out here. And it was just a psychological thing. And I think when you talk about, the psychology of sports, and psychology is huge in that aspect. And I think Myles Garrett has now tapped into kind of what Lawrence Taylor used to do. People thought Lawrence Taylor was bona fide crazy. And when he broke Joe Theismann's leg, that took him to, and it was an accident, but that took him to another level where it was like people started controlling their whole entire game plan around what Lawrence Taylor could do, and people were terrified of him. Terrified.
and here's the part in it why Myles affects the game much more than any other player on the defense is, okay, we just talked about how terrifying it would be a left tackle, a 300-pound man that has trained the most of his adult life to learn how to protect himself against somebody like Myles Garrett, somebody who is fully equipped, trained, and educated in the arts that is defending yourself in a football sense from a Myles Garrett. Now imagine that you're a quarterback and you're not trained in these arts, and you're much smaller than Myles Garrett. And that's the fear. That's why the ball comes out so quick, because when Myles Garrett is walking around, stalking around, doing all this stuff, scaring the left tackle, scaring the people in front of him, he's terrifying the quarterbacks, because they're like, I don't want anything to do with that, right? That is what we mean when we say he's weaponizing this fear against them to where Myles don't even have to have a good game sometimes, right? Ray Lewis had those games where he didn't even have to play well. You just wasn't going to run towards him, right? And that's where I see him going. Like he's been a really great player, and I think he's starting to take that step to, okay, he's one of them dudes that just impact the game by existing on a baseline at a great level. And that's another step there. So I think Myles, like when he comes out there, and this stuff is intentional, and he's doing his press conference, which he knows other teams are going to watch, and he's doing it shirtless for whatever reason, right? Because he doesn't do it all the time. Most of the time he has a shirt on. But he's doing that because he sees something that he can exploit on tape. And he's letting the world, that's his way of letting the world know, hey, you might want to watch me this week. You know, you're going to see something. I got something planned for him. And that's going to make them go, did we have the double team? Like, do we have enough? What are they going to do? I think one of the things they're going to do, and I guess this is the last thing we'll say before we switch to the second part of this, is I think one of the things he probably feels confident about is how they're going to utilize him this week, right? I think that's also an indicator because he probably sees a game plan where they're like, we're going to pick a side on a given drive and overload, right? And just we're probably Joe Woods ain't gonna send 6 or 7 all the time, right? We know he don't do that, but he's gonna divest on how he sends those 4 or 5, right? And then he'll do it to overload one side and catch them in a bad protection slide to get that one-on-one matchup. And they're betting on Joe Flacco either gonna get rid of this ball the second he sees trouble or he gonna get hurt, right?
And if he throw it 59 times like he did against the Ravens, he liable to get 10 sacks. I think that's a brilliant point you bring up. It's not all about how many people you bring. It's about where you allocate those resources and what side of the line you go about blitzing, or it could be just you moving guys around. And that's the next evolutionary step, is because you haven't seen it yet because they haven't really, I guess, had a need to do it. When they go against elite passers who are going to be able to diagnose where blitzes come, who are going to be able to understand to get them in the play, to have zone beaters or man beaters based on what you give them, the pressure is going to come from Myles Garrett, the defensive line, in the scheme of not knowing where they're coming from. I don't know if he's going to come. I don't know if he's going to not. I don't know if he's moving the A-gap. That in itself gives you enough time to have them hold the ball a few more seconds, more like split seconds in order to get in position and cause the defensive backs to be able to hold a little bit longer. So I think that's the evolutionary step. But he's definitely going to break Clay Matthews his record. Shout out to Clay Matthews. But I think he definitely only needed 1.5. I think he got that in the bag.
Yeah, Myles Garrett, and Clay Matthews is a great player, Hall of Fame caliber player, but it says a lot that Myles Garrett is effectively 1 year out of his rookie deal, and it ain't even close. He's the best defensive end edge rusher that this franchise has ever had. I don't know if you can make an argument. I don't know who's number 2 other than Clay Matthews, right? Because Clay Matthews was more of an outside linebacker.
Yeah.
So so I guess and it was a different era where you could be much smaller. You know what I mean? So, and 3-4s weren't necessarily the same thing that they are now, where 3-4s are just 5-2s, right? Right. Basically, because they never really dropped back into coverage.
Facts. I'm tired. Listen, when they started allocating these defensive ends that was undersized and being like, all right, you just stand up and rush. No, bro, you're a glorified defensive lineman. We have never respected your drop game. Your drop game has never been a focus of what we're trying to avoid. Nah.
Yeah, well, here's the freaky thing, right? The freaky thing about the evolution of these athletes is it used to be that 3-4s, like the outside linebackers were like linebackers, like 6 foot dudes, like 200-pound dudes. And you needed them to be that light because you needed them to drop back in coverage. You needed them to actually be a linebacker more so than you needed them to be a lineman. And that's why like James Harrison, guys like slip through the cracks, the smaller guys who are a little bit more athletic that can rush. But now you have so many big dudes who can just move like the wind that it's almost eliminated that ideal of what a 3, because like I remember like growing up in the early 2000s, I used to hear things like this is a guy that's a fit for a 3-4. This is a guy that's a fit for 4-3, and it would be based on size, right? Like it would be, he's just not big enough to be an end in a 4-3. It's never that anymore. It's like, well, maybe he has that length, right? Like when I saw, what's his name? There's a player coming out, Jerome Simpson, I think, coming out of Clemson, right? Yeah, and I was like, whew, that boy at 3-4. Like that 3-4.
Anthony Simmons.
Anthony Simmons. Yeah. I was like, that's a 3-4 edge if I've ever seen it. Not because he's not big. He's a big dude. It's just he's so quick and agile, right? Like Isaiah. Well, yeah, Anthony Simmons that came out earlier. I think this is a different dude. He's at the Clemson right now, number 22. Correct me in the chat.
He's a monster.
Yeah. I saw him, but I was watching him live. I was like, oh no, that's a top 15.
That guy's the deal.
Yeah. So because he was playing like stand up line, like. These dudes have evolved. It's like with basketball. If you watch like the evolving of athletic ability, where a center used to have to like post up and everything else, or a power forward used to have these defined roles. Now it's just edge rusher. It's just a big, right, that we talk about. And it's interesting how like I wonder. It's really not a thing anymore when we talk about 3-4, 4-3 defenses because everybody kind of does hybrids. But it's like. You know, it's one of those things that I see evolving, and I'm wondering, like, when are we going to get to the point where we're hanging on to 4-3 and 3-4 because we're old? And people are like, it's not really like that anymore, right? Because that was the first question when you hire defense. Are you going to do a 3-4 or a 4-3? That is such a less relevant question now than it's ever been because the difference between these defenses aren't that much because now what used to only be a guy you could put in a 4-3 because he was too big and slow is a dude you could put in a 3-4, right? Like you could put TJ Watt at edge. You could put him at 3-tech. It does not matter anymore, right? And that's
the crazy thing about it is, and I will throw this out, but before we move on to the second part is just, you know, when you just look at the pure athleticism, you know, Jadeveon Clowney ran a 4.53. And Myles Garrett ran a 4.57. These people are running around. That's criminal. These guys are running around faster than Jarvis Landry.
Jordan Davis at 340, 4.8. And he jumped 33 inches in the air.
That's one of the most impressive things I've ever seen.
It's impressive that his knees don't immediately explode when he walks. Like that is some of the athleticism in this era, and I don't know if it's going to continue to go up because this feels like computers. Like remember when computers used to be really trash, and then they just got really good, like really fast, and then now we're at the point with computers where like every computer's a good computer, right? Like it's hard to be on a bad computer, but the fastest computer is not that big of a deal anymore compared to what like a slow computer. But like I remember when I was on them like single core 1 gigahertz computers, and like I couldn't even load up Google Chrome on my stuff, right?
And so you'd be taking 8 hours to load one video.
Yeah, and it'd be choppy because you don't have a graphics card. But now it's like I'm wondering like when are we gonna hit that peak of the evolution of this where like a Chase Young coming out is not that big of a deal, right? like because there's so many guys, and I think we're closely hitting that point because it used to be a dude like Myles Garrett comes around, ain't nothing like that for the next 20 years, like a Myles Garrett. Michael Parsons came out last year, dog. Like it's like
and these dudes running 4.4, like. And you know, and people, everybody see 4.4 then got, for a while, people was lying so much. I done been at pro days where you run electric times. And you can't fool electric times. None of that. And 4.4 at a guy that's that big, I mean, it's just tremendous. It's just crazy. And that is why, and we say that to say this, that's why if you talk about how the Browns could be a potentially special unit is just because of the level of athleticism just in the Denzel Ward at corner, or if you put Denzel Ward on somebody, you don't really have to worry about Denzel Ward getting smoked. Like He has recovery. JOK ain't nobody is smoking him out of the backfield, even Christian McCaffrey. It just that you have to deal with that. We just talked about Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney. Though that's why I'll give Andrew Berry credit. The one thing that he made sure was you might be able to come in and get a win, but you not going to out athlete us because we got that covered.
The Browns defense is like fighting the X-Men. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like fighting the X-Men. There's so many mutants. Like, you out here trying to stop Colossus on one hand, using all your strength, and then Nightwing just go, that's JOK just coming back behind you real quick. You can't even, you know what I mean? And then here comes Storm out here. You know, it's just, that's what it has to feel like. Especially in the front seven. That's what I know for a fact it felt like in Carolina for them dudes. It's like we fighting the X-Men. Like, this dude got superpowers. This dude got superpowers. This dude teleports. Like, what do you want me to do? You know, and that's why if the players on this defense reach their potential, this defense is not just has the potential to be a good defense. It has the potential to be a generationally great defense because the amount of dudes who, again, I'm going to use this term, have superpowers on this defense is unparalleled. We're talking about JOK being the fastest guy on the field with the team that has Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett on it. That's generational talent there. They have to put it to execution. They have to kill some of these miscommunications. But once they get to that point, and it don't look like it's that far off from what I saw on Sunday.
No,
then
it ain't.
Once they get to that point, then this is not just a good defense. This is generational.
You saw how I know you saw this. Did you see how Emerson ragdolled that dude on the sideline?
We ain't even talking about Martin Emerson. He was really good. He
made an example out of him. The ball wasn't even coming over there. I couldn't even really be mad. I'm like, dang, that's a penalty. But I saw what he did to him. I said, all right, that's a way to make an example out of a fool. Let him know your presence is here. I'm like, man, you kind of big over there too.
And I think that's the next step for this defense. They haven't established it yet. Let me be very clear on that. But that's what they get to establish this year is remember how afraid we used to be of the Ravens defense because they had Ray Lewis, Ed Reed. Like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do?
That was rightfully so.
Or the Pittsburgh defense, right? We used to have fear about it. And I don't think people have fear about it because they don't know what's coming. They got fear about Myles Garrett like that, but they don't know how good this unit can be. And that's what he's trying to do when he does that, is when you play the Browns, I want you to know from the first snap, it's going to be a long day for you. Like, this is not, if you get this, you getting it. But it ain't going to be easy. And I think that's what they're trying to instill on that defensive side of the ball is we want you to know when the Browns come to town, bet the under, homie, because it ain't happening. Right? Because it ain't happening. That's what I think the goal is. But we had a great talk about the psychology. I sounded real smart for 30 minutes. You know what I mean?
Right. And then you fumbled the rock at the end.
You know what I mean? Hey, look, you know what I mean? I did what the defense did. A couple blown plays at the end, right? But we're talking about the psychology of this. And I think that's a great topic. But now we're going to move on to a different type of psychology on Gbqc's second channel. So if you want to know what could go wrong, right? We're all pretty comfortable, chilling, got our feet up. We play the Jets. We ain't worried. But we always need to have an eye on what can happen because then that's when somebody can hit you from behind when you're comfortable. So, G, let's walk over to your channel and let's get it started.